So you want to put a houseplant in an aquarium, something that is totally awesome to do, and I think everybody should try it at least once. But there is something in regards to doing this that I've never heard anybody talk about on the internet ever, and it's something that could be a little dangerous to your fish. So we're going to talk about that today amongst the exact process that you need to go through to add a houseplant to an aquarium. So we're going to start out here with the bookshelf aquarium, this one on the right here that we set up in the last video. We added some Mondo grass to it. This is not a house plant. It's a kind of a swampy terrestrial plant. It's a really good nitrate sponge, and we have it just kind of perched in this aquarium within the manzanita wood branch that we have hanging down into it. So if we can zoom down here, we can see this intricate network of roots and wood from that branch. But I think what would be really cool is to put not the skateboard into the tank, but this rope plant house plant that I just bought. And full disclosure, I've never put this specific plant into an aquarium. I think it's gonna work, maybe it won't. There are certain plants that work really well in this type of scenario. One, of course, being the pothos plant, which is, I think, what most people start with when they try something like this. There's, of course, a bunch of other plants that work really well for this type of thing, and I'll pop them up on the screen here, or probably throughout the video we'll talk about maybe a few more of them, and so you can have more than just the pothos option when doing something like this. To start out, the first thing you're going to want to do is, of course, get all the soil off the plant that you're going to use. So I recommend taking this outside and doing it. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier, and you're not going to get a bunch of soil down your disposal, right? So I'm just going to spray it off here. I'm going to get my fingers in, work the soil, and hopefully that your root ball in your plant isn't too hard, or else this could take a while. I also let this thing sit in a pot for a while, just filled up with water to try and get every little bit of soil off. Not sure if this is completely necessary, but it's what I chose to do. So after fitting this thing in the aquarium, I realized it was just a little bit too big. I needed to kind of dissect this thing a little bit to make it work. And while I inspected it, I saw that there was a lot of perlite still left over in the soil. So after I broke it up into 4 separate pieces, I then took it out to the utility sink and really worked those roots as best I could to get every little bit off. And you can see that some stuff still was coming off of this after I thought I got it pretty good. Here we go. So we got our plant in place, kind of nestled in between the stick that you can now barely see here. But the important thing with this is that you want to make sure that a portion of that root ball is up out of the water. It doesn't have to be very much, just even like a tiny little amount, but that's important for the oxygen that the plant roots need. This is going to be a less important thing if you have a proper aquarium setup with a filter where you can position like the outflow near the roots, okay? That way you're gonna get much more oxygen in the tank compared to something like this. But I think because we have this more or less stagnant water, we don't have a rich oxygenation, we're not gonna be adding an air stone, I think having that root ball up out of the water just a tiny little bit is gonna be important for its longevity. Because this tank is so small, it's really kind of impossible to see what I did here, so you just have to take my word for it. The other thing is that, you know, because every plant is going to be a little different, there are going to be some types of plants that you probably don't need to have any amount of root up out of the water if you're going to do something like this. So just keep that in mind. Nothing is, you know, it's not black and white. It's not one side or the other here. You might have to play around a little bit with the plant that you decide to use. I also threw in a few chain swords down here because I was kind of tired of looking at only a brown bottom here, but I think it looks pretty cool. If I find some more chain swords in the other room, we might put a few in back here to just kind of balance it out. Real quick, guys, just wanted to let you know that the automatic 17% off discount on Legit Fish Food is going to be ending tomorrow night. So that's Sunday night. I think this video is going to come out, should come out on a Saturday. So if you've been meaning to try Legit, now is probably a good time to do it. You're going to save a bunch of money. Don't forget we also have the free samples available too if you want to try all 3 of the foods for basically free. We have a bunch of food, specifically the bottom feeder and I think a little bit of the community in these like improperly sealed bags. So they're sealed a little bit too low. They're a huge pain in the butt to open. I'm gonna list both of those on the website and they're gonna be half off. They're gonna be marked as improperly sealed bags, but if it's something that, you know, when you get your food, you take it out of the bag anyway and put it into something else, then this also might be like the best time to try out Legit if you haven't tried it already, or you wanna store up on some food that is just as good as everything else we have. They're just hard to open bags. But that is more or less the setup here, guys. Very straightforward. We're not gonna have to use a filter on this tank. Definitely not, because we have such a big biomass of roots in here that are gonna suck up pretty much any nitrogen that this tank ever sees. And that's really, I think, the biggest advantage to adding some type of houseplant or terrestrial plant to an aquarium, is that you get that added benefit of having that additional nitrate sponge. Every plant, of course, is going to be different. I don't know how well this plant is at absorbing things like ammonia and nitrate compared to the Mondo grass. The Mondo grass might have been just plenty to do the job that we needed, but it still has that little feature. It has that added cushion that you add to the safety of the aquarium that you're setting up. And I mean, come on, that just looks way cooler than it did before. More green usually means it looks better. But what about the thing that I said in the beginning of the video, the thing that I've never really heard anybody talk about? I did this experiment like a super long time ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and so I don't really remember the exact numbers or, you know, all the little details of it, but the premise of it I still have up here, so I'm gonna try and explain it to the best of my ability. I was curious in how much a pothos plant that you add to your aquarium or filter would have an impact on absorbing ammonia and nitrate. So what I did was I set up a fresh aquarium. It didn't have any substrate, anything. It was just, you know, the glass box with fresh water in it. I put in a hang-on back filter, and then I also took a pothos plant. Can't really remember how big it was, but I think it was pretty, you know, as big as I could, and I stuffed it into the back of the HOB. There was no biological media in it, just the plant roots of the pothos plant. So then I was like, okay, I'll measure the ammonia and the nitrate over the course of, you know, the beginning here, the first few days. It should be 0 up until the point of when I was gonna then take liquid ammonium chloride, drip it into the tank to set a concentration, and then the idea was, okay, we'll watch that sort of drop down over time, and we'll be able to measure how long that takes. But what happened was I took the plant, I stripped it of all the soil as best I could, put it in the filter. I checked ammonia the day after and it was 0. And then it was like the second or third day I started to get an ammonia concentration, and that ammonia concentration actually started to rise despite the fact that I hadn't been adding ammonia to the tank yet. And so that told me basically one thing, is that the plant that I added was in fact the ammonia source, because that was the only thing that was added to the tank. So I got the opposite effect that I wanted, was, you know, the ammonia or the nitrate that I was going to add to the aquarium to drop, but it actually increased ammonia. So what was happening? That ammonia spike from adding the plant is probably due to the fact that, you know, you're taking a plant with a bunch of roots that are not adapted to being completely submerged in water, and there's some kind of die-off taking place that is then the source of the ammonia and eventually the nitrate that you might see in the tank. Now, I'm not saying that every time you add a plant to an aquarium, you're going to have an ammonia spike. Keep in mind that when I did that, that was not an established aquarium. If I were to do the exact same thing and put it into a tank that was already set up and had a cycled filter, I don't know if we would have seen any spike of ammonia that would have caused any problems. So there's no way to go back and test that. I can't really remember off the top of my head what those concentrations were. I don't think I wrote them down anywhere because it was kind of a failed experiment. But it's interesting, right? So I don't know, maybe we should start up a new experiment and really look at that again and find out if that is something that could be a problem. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. So here's something that you typically might see when you're trying to transition a house plant or a terrestrial plant into more of an aquatic one. This sort of buildup of organic material up at the top of the water. You might see this just normally in an aquarium where you're not doing this, but you can also see it around the glass here. So just to emphasize that sort of transitory period of, you know, there's going to be roots, certain parts of the roots that are dying off, and you're going to have that leaching of different compounds into your tank. Just something to be aware of. Not all of it's bad, right? But just something you want to be on top of. So that's one of the reasons why we have the skimmer in here trying to suck that stuff up, but because there's so much blockage here, there's not a lot of access of the water to get pulled in here, a lot of things blocking it. It's not doing the best job, but it's something that will eventually go away over time. Sometimes I am an impatient man, and because we want to add fish to this aquarium before the end of this video, we're going to go ahead and add in some of our Fritz nitrifying bacteria to the mix here. That is going to help any of the potential ammonia spike from our decaying plant roots in this tank and get everything ready for our fish. We'll go ahead and let this thing sit overnight, continue to clear up, and we'll be adding fish here in just a second. I know it's a little anticlimactic with the golden white clouds, guys. We've been adding them to a lot of tanks lately, but I mean, just look at these fish. They pop so well. I think that they're probably going to be the best fish to at least observe from afar in this tank because we have so much stuff in it. Once we get a few more tanks set up, we'll switch gears and we'll start to get into some new fish. I know that I certainly need that, and I'm sure you're looking forward to it too. We still have to put some fish in this tank as well. So I think that is pretty much the sum total of today's video, guys. I hope you learned something new. Maybe if you have been considering adding a houseplant to a tank, this video answered most of the questions that you have. If you have more questions or I didn't answer something, drop it down in the comments and I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. So now that we have this all done, sort of, we can now move on to some bigger tanks. So like the one behind me, we still have the 4-foot that is behind you, and then we'll make our way into the Legit Fish Food headquarters. Check out the sticker store and of course Legit Fish Food for a free sample or any of the things that I talked about earlier in the video. Thank you again for watching a third time, and we'll see you in the next one.